Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a universe that's luxurious yet fascinatingly foul. Get ready to step through the gilded gates of the palace, where Queen Elizabeth I, with her towering coiffure and a face sculpted from white powder, wields power that sparks endless curiosity. But don't be fooled by the splendor. Just behind those velvet drapes lies the stench of a fairy tale gone rotten, turning the royal court into a labyrinth of bizarre aromas. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you, so don't hesitate to leave a comment below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Queen's face, caked in white powder, crowned with towering coiffure, and haloed by resplendent power, might seem purely magnificent, but do not be deceived. Beneath those golden embroidered fabrics and flickering candlelight lurks a stench-filled nightmare. The odor of unwashed bodies, soiled cloth, and mildew rising from mattresses, carpets, and walls. All these blend into a Tudor bouquet that no faint-nosed visitor could endure. Before delving deeper into the layers of fragrance and courtly suffering, let us review the resume of the ruler of this scented universe, Queen Elizabeth I. She was born in the year 1553, the only surviving daughter of King Henry VIII and Queen Anne Boleyn. Her father, Henry VIII, became notorious for 6 marriages and the English Reformation. Her mother was executed when Elizabeth I was only 3. In the aftermath of this tragedy, she and her sister by the same mother were stripped of all titles. Yet, under the protection of certain nobles, Elizabeth I remained in the line of succession. Prince Edward, Elizabeth I's half-brother, acceded immediately after Henry VIII's death but died young. Her half-sister Mary I succeeded next, yet her reign proved brief as well. In the year 1558, at the tender age of 15, Elizabeth I was crowned queen. She governed the Kingdom of England for 44 years, until the year 1623, becoming one of the longest reigning monarchs in Britain's history. Under Queen Elizabeth I's rule, England entered a golden age of literature and the arts. Names such as William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe lit up the English stage. The Royal Navy achieved the feat of defeating the Spanish Armada. Trade boomed, laying the foundations for the overseas empire to come. She deftly balanced Catholic and Protestant factions, maintained internal peace, and championed scientific and artistic endeavors. Yet not all was idyllic. Her religious policies sometimes proved harsh toward Catholics. Rural poverty remained widespread, and famine and plague struck with alarming regularity. Returning to Whitehall, this magnificent but Spartan palace, there was absolutely no central heating. Instead, the floors and lower walls were covered with tree branch rushes, overlaid with mixtures of dried herbs, lavender flowers, mint leaves, and sprigs of bay laurel. This produced a faint herb smoke, intended to mask spoiled food, human waste, and even rats. In truth, however, this herbal layer only underscored the court's pungency. Each step Elizabeth I took seemed to trail a cloud of spices and dried flowers, an invisible shield preserving her from the odors of days without baths. In the Tudor era, bathing was discouraged. People believed that water and soap would open pores, allowing noxious airs to enter the body. Even with the finest resources in the kingdom, Elizabeth I dared only one monthly soak in a wooden tub lined with linen and filled with hot water steeped in herbs. These brief immersions brought momentary relief, but never true cleanliness. Her portable tub was moved from chamber to chamber, supplied with water heated in copper pots, and scented with a few sprigs of mint or rosemary for a so-called natural aroma. To conceal the reality of infrequent bathing, Elizabeth I employed cosmetics and perfumes as armor. Thick layers of white lead fondant covered her face. Deep red mercury, based rouge stained her lips. Ambergris and musk scents emanated from ornate scent balls placed beside her. Shades long together, forming a dense, fragrant smoke. Courtiers entering her presence believed she had just bathed in an opulent perfumed bath, while in fact she had not touched clean water for weeks. All who came to court marveled at the brilliant colors, dancing candlelight, and gold-trimmed costumes. Yet few spoke of the underlying odor, perhaps out of politeness or because none smelled markedly better. It was rare for Tudors to bathe more than a handful of times per year. Knowing water caused disease, they avoided baths altogether. The scents of unwashed bodies, soiled fabric, and mildew became accepted background noise. Only the most sensitive or fastidious souls found it overwhelming. In sum, the portrait of Elizabeth I is more than that of an extraordinary, long-reigning queen who brought peace and prosperity. It is also the story of a monarch's hygiene practices in her era. When she died at the age of 69, the Tudor court still bore the indelible mark of the Tudor bouquet, a blend at once splendid and faintly ghastly. The strange thing is, by today's standards, Elizabeth I might strike us as almost winsome in her personal hygiene attempts. She changed her linen undergarments every day, washed her hands and face several times with rose-scented vinegar, and used soft cloths to dab away grime after long audiences. Sounds pretty admirable, right? But all those efforts barely made a dent in the Tudor dirt culture. A world without sewers, without modern toilets, without any notion that clean water should flow away rather than linger. Imagine those tree rush mats underfoot in Whitehall. They were supposed to mask odours with lavender sprigs, mint leaves, and bay laurels, but replacements happened only occasionally. In between, detritus built up, spilled broth crusted into fibres, breadcrumbs lodged in crevices, and yes, rat droppings. The wooden walls, damp from practical necessity and leaky windows, fostered mould in every unseen corner. To keep the place even vaguely warm, the court hung heavy tapestries and laid thick carpets, perfect insulation for winter chills, but even better at trapping every whiff of mildew. The royal chambers, decked in silk satin, velvet brocade, and gold thread embroidery, might have dazzled the eye, but they were invisible breeding grounds for bacteria. Those sumptuous fabrics retained body heat and moisture, so whenever Elizabeth I walked through her own court, her elaborate gowns, no matter how pristine, soaked up sweat, leftover perfume, and stray crumbs. Even the tiniest creatures, field mice or sparrows that found their way inside, added their own contributions to the tapestry of smells. Now, distractive scent tactics became a courtly art. Pomander's little metal balls filled with aromatic wax or herbs dangled from belts. Cloth sachets bulged with cloves, ambergris, and myrrh. Gloves were dipped in musk solution, furniture was rubbed with scented oils, and incense burners wafted frankincense and benzoin resin through corridors. You could call it the Tudor version of luxury air fresheners. As master of her image, Elizabeth I commissioned a royal perfume department, a cadre of skilled apothecaries and scentsmiths who formulated blends to drift before her arrival and linger long after she departed. They stewed civet blends for gloves, dabbed rose oil on oak panels, and marshalled frankincense chests to stave off, well, everything else. Some modern historians even speak of secret odour control centres tucked behind the tapestry walls. Servants would press herb-infused pastilles under chair legs, light bundles of fragrant wood over privy shafts, and burn cones of resin in side chambers. They chased away noxious smells with such zeal that, for those in the know, it became a performance all its own. Yet, despite this elaborate choreography, the dank undertones of mould and the sharp tang of human waste never truly vanished. They only hid, waiting patiently under the veneer of fragrance. From a distance, the Tudor court glimmered with banquet feasts and masked balls, gilded carriages, and sumptuous silks. Candlelight danced over plate after plate of roast venison, spiced stew, sugar sculptures, and halls worth of silver tankards. Musicians plucked lutes in haze of pipe smoke, and dancers in farthingales performed intricate measures on rush-covered floors. To the eye, it was a jubilant display of wealth and refinement. But beneath the splendor lay a collective confession. The court had abandoned actual bathing in favor of perfumed illusions. Cleanliness meant layers of scent, not the simple slide of water over skin. Imagine, if you will, the day's proceedings. You enter, greeted by the Queen's aromatic halo citrus and rose, ambergris and musk, and think, wow, what a fragrance. Then, as you step closer, you catch a hint of something less refined. The raw odor of last night's feast, the damp undercarriage of a moth-eaten rug, the rustle of half-rotted linens in a side room. It was a complex stage production, where each actor, nobleman, lady-in-waiting, guard played a part by layering scent over scent, hoping to stay in the Queen's good graces. and, perhaps, hoping no one noticed their own, natural aroma. Even Elizabeth I herself, with all her powdered makeup and perfumed gloves, could not escape the underlying reality. Every step she took on that rush mat was a dance over history: crumbs of bread, bits of hay, traces of mould, and microscopic flecks of courtly sweat. And every rustle of her silk skirt stirred up an invisible cloud of blended odours. A swirl of lavender meets musk, meets mildew meets, something the mind recoils from. This wasn't unique to Whitehall. Across Tudor England, nobles equated cleanliness with wearing a fresh linen shift and hiding outer garments in cedar-lined chests. They believed that changing one's smock was akin to washing the body. Outer layers, velvet, brocade, damask, were too precious for water. A single wash could ruin the dye or weaken the weave, so they merely brushed, aired, and perfumed them, trusting cedar chests and mothballs to keep away insects more than actual hygiene measures. And when public plague hit London, the court packed up and fled. Royal progresses through the countryside doubled as an escape from the mounting odours and contagious diseases that flourished in cramped, fetid streets. At each manor and noble house on the route, a new stage was set. Lavender strewn on floors, fires burning sandalwood, applewood embers glowing beneath herb baskets. For a brief respite, Elizabeth I would breathe easier, joining in provincial revels where the air was fresher at least, until the next halt brought her back to the same aromatic battlefield. Through all this, Elizabeth I, ever the virtuoso of perception, used scent as political theatre. She understood that fragrance announced her arrival, masked the unmentionable, and reinforced the illusion of majesty. Her court, meanwhile, stumbled along trying to emulate her, layering pomander upon glove, pomander upon pomander, in a never-ending scramble to keep pace with the Queen's olfactory aura. So, yes, by modern standards, Elizabeth I's personal hygiene attempts, daily linen changes, vinegar washes, herbal rub-downs might seem almost quaint. But in a society that lacked plumbing, that feared water itself, those small rituals were heroic gestures against an ever-rising tide of stench. The Tudor court, with all its finery and fragrance, remained a stage for smell, a spectacle both beautiful and unsettling. In the Tudor world, perfume was not merely for beautification, it was a tactical shield for every facet of the sense of smell. Elizabeth I understood this perfectly. She wielded fragrances as armour, concealing every flaw of body and court alike. A heavy veil of scent functioned just like her thick white powder. The thicker the layer, the less anyone noticed the secrets lurking beneath. Tonight, imagine slipping into that perfumed armour with me, as we tiptoe through the scented corridors of Whitehall. Picture Elizabeth I's personal collection of royal fragrances, from delicate French rose to exotic Beirut frankincense, from rare ambergris to precious musk. Ambergris, often called sea amber, is a costly secretion from the sperm whale's intestines, aged by ocean currents and sun until it acquires its unique fixative qualities. Queen Elizabeth I possessed at least 3 distinct signature blends: a light floral day scent, a richer, spicier evening elixir for banquets, and a medicinal prescription, ambergris, musk blend reserved for when her physicians deemed her throat in need of soothing. Each garment, each accessory, carried its own olfactory signature. The daily wardrobe was flavour-locked with the family's chosen rosewood or violet base. Gloves were soaked in musk to release a personal aroma with every gesture, and small scented pouches, pomanders, hung from girdles to mask the combined odours of sweat and candle soot. Such royal incense became a symbol of power. A noble who caught even a wisp of Elizabeth I's personal blend would consider it an honour evidence that they had stepped into her scent dominion. But here's the twist. Perfume only disguised the surface layer. Beneath the lavender and rose, the true undertones lingered. The rush-lined floors, heavy tapestries, and velvet drapes meant to warm the chambers harboured bacteria and dust mites. Gloves steeped in musk became breeding grounds for skin fungi. The lead-based white cosmetic cake clogged pores, fostering cystic eruptions and chronic dermatitis. In short, the very items designed to mask flaws often aggravated them. The Queen's closest attendants, the ladies-in-waiting, the makeup artists, the perfumers lived with a front-row seat to this aromatic carnival. They inhaled the mingled scents of rosemary and frying lard, of half-burnt candle tallow, of mouse droppings in dark corners, of lingering ambergris, and of human skin long withheld from water. This was no mere fragrance profile. It was a full-scale olfactory feast that commanded awe and a discreet holding of breath by all who served or visited. Because of this, Elizabeth I commanded the sense of smell arena as decisively as she wielded speech and policy. She understood that scent could assert authority, shape perceptions, and bolster her mystique. When she entered a room, that waft of civet and rose would precede her, bending the atmosphere to her will. The courtiers scrabbled to emulate her, layering pomanders upon pomanders, desperate to keep pace with the queen's aromatic aura. Imagine for a moment the suspense of court life. A hush falls as the queen approaches, and you strain to detect the heralding bouquet, praying it is the day blend light jasmine, and violet rather than the evening blend, with its pungent musk note thick enough to choke. One false step in choosing the wrong pomander, and you risked social exile, or at least a fainting spell among lady-in-waiting ranks. Yet the grandest performance could never fully silence the undercurrent of reality. Between grand halls and gold-threaded finery lay the odour of human fallibility, a damp cloak rubbed by unwashed skin, a tapestry brushed by dusty heels, a skillet scoured only with cloth. Perfume could only dance over these base notes, it could not transform them. Tonight, as we drift through this scented labyrinth, let us appreciate the Queen's genius and her predicament in equal measure. Scent was her silent proclamation of dominance, yet it was also a confession of necessity in a world that shunned water. Elizabeth I's reign, majestic though it was, remained tethered to the primal truth that no amount of ambergris could ever erase the human scent beneath. So, dear night owl, if you feel that soft tug of curiosity, don your pomander, highlight your presence with a spritz of musk, and venture with me deeper into the scented shadows of Tudor power. Let us uncover the layers, inhale with care, and discover how Elizabeth I waged olfactory warfare in the most intoxicating and unsettling court the world has ever known. The Tudor hygiene art led to a two-tier wash system. The inner layer, made of linen, was changed and laundered daily, steeped in boiling water, rubbed with homemade soap, while the outer garments, those sumptuous silks, velvets and brocades, were merely dust-fluffed, air-dried and scented, never truly meeting a wash. This was simply inevitable. Those prized, intricately woven fabrics would disintegrate if soaked in water. Imagine, if you will, a royal wardrobe bursting with gowns only worn a handful of times, each one already soaked in sweat, perfumed oils, spicy banquet aromas, hearth smoke, and, yes, occasionally a faint whiff of rodent droppings. When tucked away in cedar-lined chests, the fabrics did not rot, but they did preserve every layer of odour history. Only for grand feasts or court audiences would a dress be brought out, powder-brushed, tucked into a scented cloth, or gently waved with a feather duster dipped in sachet herbs. Every couple of weeks, the clotted lint, caked food crumbs, and dust-trapped threads would be revived by a brisk brushing, nothing more. And so, a courtly scent biography formed, so distinctive that any newcomer might identify the Tudor palace simply by his nose. It was olfactory branding at its finest and most unsettling. Meanwhile, real and false hair alike languished in neglect. Fearful of head lice, Elizabeth I opted early for towering wigs of human and animal hair in a riot of reds and browns. These heavy coiffures were dusted with fragrant powder lavender, rose, or orris root to mask scalp odours. Beneath the wig, however, her true hair lay unwashed, soaked in sebum and dead skin cells, providing a perfect breeding ground for lice. On occasion she would dab vinegar or pennyroyal oil onto her scalp, but this only offered temporary relief and stung like fire. When the time came to remove a wig, her hairdresser would melt resinous herbal oil over a gentle flame to dissolve the glue, releasing a burst of herbal smoke that engulfed the room. Yet this oil merely slid off the surface grime. The deeper filth remained, caked into the hairline, quietly awaiting its next maintenance session. Nits and lice eggs clung to every strand, plucked out one by steady fingers or punished by singeing, an all-too-common method that promised dramatic results at the risk of burns. Elizabeth I relied on wigs as a shield, a fortress of style and status. But under that fortress lay a body that had never truly been cleansed of germs and odours. In a world where water was suspect and bathing feared, the Queen's head remained an island of concealed decay. And so, dear viewer, picture this. You enter a private chamber to assist the Queen with her morning routine. You see rows of wigs perched on carved stands, each labelled for a different occasion. Council day, festival night, hunting farewell. You watch as a lady-in-waiting lifts a wig, revealing beneath it a rat's nest of hair, glistening with ancient powder and new perspiration. You notice the faint scent of rosemary essential oil mixed with something more primal. You brace yourself, yet you dare not inhale too deeply. This bedroom theatre was the daily reality for Elizabeth I. The same hands that applied delicate rouge and blended crushed pearls onto her cheeks also combed through knotted hair, plucked stubborn lice, and bound the remnants with scented cloth. Then came the wig, perfectly oiled, powdered, and positioned, transforming that human nest into a symbol of timeless elegance. Meanwhile, in her dressing room, the Queen changed through layers of linens, farthingales, petticoats, and outer gowns. Each underlayer was fresh. Each overlayer carried the scent of the court's past. The effect was a sensory patchwork. Linen crisp with vinegar rinse, silk soft with cedar sachet, velvet thick with herb, dust, and hair humming with an herbal sizzle. It was a living, breathing collage of Tudor daily life. And here's where the suspense kicks in. A sudden knock. A diplomat arrives. He's unfamiliar with the palace's olfactory code. As he steps across the threshold, he inhales that signature Queen scent, then recoils as the underlying notes of damp wool and faint rodent tang emerge. His carefully composed face wavers for a heartbeat. Will he hide his reaction? Will he interpret the layers as mystique or as sheer neglect? Elizabeth I, ever the strategist, leaned into this olfactory power play. She chose fragrances that reinforced her authority. A swirl of musk that suggested hidden depths. A trail of ambergris that spoke of exotic reach. A whisper of rose that hinted at cultivated refinement. And when whispers reached her, "Your Majesty," some find the scent overpowering. She simply adjusted her perfume formula, adding more floral top notes to soften the blend, or more spice to punctuate her presence. But the truth, always lurking beneath, remained. The Queen's wardrobe and the palace itself formed a grand stage, walled off from true cleanliness, draped in noble disguise. Elizabeth I's inner garments ensured she stayed as clean as any Tudor would endure. Her outer attire guaranteed she looked and smelled regal. What no perfume could erase was the smell of a world that feared water, that worshipped appearance at the expense of reality. So there you have it, the Tudor tier system, the wig drama, the fragrant illusions, and the ever-present shadow of odour. In a sleepy world where bathing equaled disease, perfume and powder became a life raft, keeping the Queen afloat in a sea of sweat and dust. And while we modern folk might shudder, we can't help but admire the sheer theatricality of it all. Join me next time as we explore how Elizabeth I's makeup rituals waged war on the signs of aging and what that cost her. Until then, dear nocturnal wanderers, keep your fans humming, your lights dimmed, and your senses braced for more fragrant secrets from the Tudor court. Now, picture the royal wardrobe chamber. Gleaming jacinth brocade cloaks, studded with gold, velvet gowns embroidered with pearls. Each garment a true work of art and yet, secretly, a scent museum. These treasures hang in cedarwood armoires, the wood's natural oils meant to neutralize gentle odors, but sweat, rancid food particles, and even microscopic parasites cling to every stitch, escaping any cedar-fresh illusion. On an ordinary day, Elizabeth I owned hundreds of outfits, but a handful became her favorites, her signature looks which she wore again and again. Over time, these beloved robes amassed layers of her personal aroma, the faint tickle of lavender from a pomander tucked in the sleeve, the slightest trace of rosewater from a hurried face wipe, the lingering tang of spiced syllabub at a midsummer feast. Gentle hints from courtiers suggested she diversify her wardrobe, but none dared press too hard after all. A whispered critique of the Queen's scent could feel dangerously close to insolence. And then there was the matter of drainage. Tudor palaces lacked anything resembling modern plumbing. Royal guardrobes, little wooden boxes with hinged seats built into outer walls, dropped waste straight into cesspits below. Elizabeth I's private stool, a sumptuous close stool, adorned with velvet and gilded details, was tended by the groom of the stool, the most trusted servant in her household. This attendant managed the Queen's most intimate moments, ensuring privacy and sanitization as much as possible. No one else dared even whisper about those odours, for to mention them was the cardinal sin of the court. Yet the stench nonetheless slipped through. In summer's heat, the cesspits festered, sending up sour miasmas that crept along corridors. Dukes and duchesses, desperate to shield their nostrils, rolled out woolen rugs, sprinkled crushed mint and lavender over the floors, and burned bundles of juniper boughs in braziers. Even so, a stray whiff could reach the grand hall enough to make a visiting envoy sneeze before kneeling before the throne. Consider the grand processional through the painted chamber. Elizabeth I draped in cloth of gold, courtiers arrayed on either side, candles flickering like captive stars. All at once, the scented smoke of perfumed oils mingled with the sharper, more rebellious notes of decay. A visiting ambassador, sensitive to strong smells, remarked in a letter home that he felt caught between an exotic garden and a barnyard. He recovered his composure, how could he not, in front of Her Majesty, and pressed forward, tears welling in his eyes. Behind the scenes, staff worked tirelessly. A layer of rushes, fresh each spring, was laid down to absorb wayward drips and droppings. Heavy tapestries were lifted at regular intervals, beaten with wooden paddles to shake out dust. A ritual performed by footmen in linen smocks and puckered caps. Even the palace cats, once helpful for rodent control, roamed hidden passages, depositing their own contributions to the aroma profile. Every element combined into a complex symphony of scent rich, riotous, and relentlessly human. Meanwhile, Elizabeth I's personal perfumers, aptly dubbed the Royal Perfume Office, laboured over secret mixtures. They ground ambergris into fine powder, blended it with civet and musk, and aged their concoctions in dark cellars beneath Whitehall. Jars of scented pomades and oil jars lined a long oak table, each labelled in the Queen's hand. Daylight Melange, Feast of Eve, Stomach Salve. The latter, a pungent brew intended to calm an upset stomach, often overpowered everything else, trailing behind the Queen like an olfactory exclamation point. Fascinatingly, courtiers learned to read social cues by scent. Arriving at court, you'd inhale the gentle prelude of rose and ambergris, sure sign that His Majesty's presence was near. But then came the anchor of reality, the undertone of spilled ale, the insistence of sweat laden with nutmeg, the lingering note of yesterday's fish stew. Those who could identify each layer earned curious respect, an unintended prestige in the game of noses. And so, the Tudor court held its breath, sometimes literally, while Elizabeth I reigned. Her power was cemented not only by laws and speeches, but also by the invisible empire of aroma she constructed. She commanded her subjects through sight and sound and, most remarkably, through smell. Her scented aura became as legendary as her virgin queen persona, inviolable, untouchable, and for most visitors impossible to fully embrace. In the end, Elizabeth I lay at the heart of this fragrant labyrinth. A woman who wove perfumed veils so thick that for nearly 50 years she ruled above the stench of ordinary life. But even she could not eradicate the odours that clung to her kingdom. The biology of dirt and decay remained undefeated, muffled beneath cedar chests and swirl of pomander smoke, but alive in the hush of hidden corridors. And that hidden reality, more than pageantry or policy, defined the true scent of power. The royal banquet ritual was, quite frankly, an olfactory disaster. Picture the great hall stuffed with perhaps 1,000 nobles, each draped in 6 or 7 layers of fabric, palms snug in musk-drenched gloves. Imagine the swirl of roasting meats, heavy with grease, the undercurrent of red wine mingling with human perspiration, the tang of potent spices, and the damp mildew rising from ancient stone walls, all stewing together into one colossal, thick, Tudor stew of scent that only the bravest or most polite of Western visitors dared not mention. Many marvelled at the pageantry, yet quietly pinched their noses. In that cramped space, arms brushed across silken sleeves, and every noble clutched a pomander, a little ball of dried flowers and herbs slung around the neck, to no better effect than a feeble handkerchief pressed to the face. When the dishes finally emerged, they arrived in an almost shocking diversity. Platters of seafood oysters, mussels, and smoked fish next to venison roast and spit-fried sparrow, alongside elaborate sweetmeats and bowls of thick sugar jelly. Sugar, the ultimate status symbol, was strewn generously throughout each course. Elizabeth I, ever indulgent, savoured spoonfuls of candied fruit, leaving her breath with an unmistakable candy sweetness, a curious contrast to the pungent haze of the hall. Courtiers, keen to muffle any hint of foul breath, chewed on clove morsels or swallowed nutmeg pastilles, performing an almost comical dance of nibbling and swallowing to keep their halitosis at bay. And then there was the matter of hand-to-mouth dining. No silver forks yet existed, so fingers were primary utensils. Fingers still damp with sweat from quivering anticipation, and slick with animal fat from the preceding platter. Bites of bread, pastry and meat transferred crumbs to palms, which were then lightly wiped on a linen napkin before being dabbed with a drop of rosewater. Not truly cleansing, but at least ceremonially refreshing. The linen, however, was only briefly perfumed, never laundered mid-banquet, so each swipe of fabric merely smeared fresh grease over lingering stains. Seated on chairs draped in crimson damask and embroidered silk, courtiers hardly noticed the musty tang of mould growing in the upholstery. The close stool Elizabeth I's own portable commode sat discreetly beside her table, should nature call during the long evening. Her groom of the stool, that most trusted of confidants, quietly hovered, offering a decorative bowl of scented water for foot and hand washing. Most guests, however, gave this opportunity a wide berth. Better to suffer a hot foot than endure an awkward proximity to royal excreta. Music swelled as dancers in pastel chiffons, powdered and perfumed, wove through the crowd. Their skirts billowed like scented clouds, a mixture of sweet jasmine and stale human musk. At intervals, the hall doors parted as a stately carriage made its ceremonial approach, horses stamping in the courtyard beyond. Any guest lingering near the Queen would catch the unmistakable fusion of ambergris and white lead powder clinging to her robes, a fragrant veil that still failed to mask her unwashed body. This banquet was no mere dinner party. It was a full-blown feast of fragrances, one that compelled every attendee to toggle between admiration and revulsion. The Queen's power was palpable in every scented breath she exhaled, yet the unrelenting assault on the nostrils made it a test of endurance. Some younger courtiers, unaccustomed to the intense layering of aromas, furtively retrieved small bunches of mint or lavender from hidden pockets, pressing them beneath their noses in brief moments of relief. Throughout it all, Elizabeth I maintained her poise, lifting goblets of spiced wine, offering curt nods, all while gliding through the hall like a fragrant apparition. Each rustle of her velvet gown and every measured step left a scented wake of civet and vine leaf. The lighting hundreds of candles flickering in grand chandeliers cast a golden glow, but also melted wax onto the floor, adding another sour note of burning tallow to the sensory mix. Food servers in doublets and hose wove between tables, balancing tureens of pottage and plates of roast beef. They navigated a maze of idling courtiers and spilled porridge, careful not to jostle the tables lest gravy splash onto silk hose or let puddles of liquid trap more dust. If a noble slipped, a chorus of startled gasps and quick handkerchief waves rose up, a momentary flare of chaos before the music resumed. And oh, the music! A vile consort struck up madrigals, lutes plucked courtly tunes, and a lone piper added a rustic edge to the proceedings. The melodies, soaring above the din of clinking goblets and muffled coughs, created an eerie soundtrack, stately and graceful on one level, but undercut by the throbbing hum of humanity, caught betwixt elegance and putrefaction. In the furthest corners of the hall, hidden by drapes of velvet, perfumed braziers, smouldered sandalwood and myrrh to cover the ever-present stench of slow decay. Yet, every inhale reminded attendees, this was the reality of court life. Behind the gilded veneer, the smell of grime and sweat persisted as an unwelcome companion to power. So, there you have it. The royal banquet. A triumphant spectacle to the eye, but an epic trial for the nose. It was here, amid the swirl of robes, the clash of silverware, and the cascade of candlelight, that Elizabeth I reigned supreme not just as monarch, but as mistress of scent, orchestrating an atmosphere that proclaimed her authority in every inhalation. and for those fortunate or unfortunate enough to attend, it was an unforgettable, nose-tickling adventure in the fragrant heart of Tudor opulence. In Tudor diplomatic receptions, Elizabeth I understood the power of distance both in space and in scent. She would stand upon a raised dais, the courtiers kneeling far below, and when it was time to speak directly, she'd lift a delicate handkerchief dipped in her signature perfume to her lips and wrists. Then, with a deliberate step back, she'd allow the fragrance to unfold, to drift toward her guest and take command of the conversation. Sometimes a visiting ambassador would catch a bright note of citrus, mingling with the soft sweetness of jasmine, punctuated by the spicy warmth of nutmeg. Every nuance was painstakingly crafted by the Royal Perfume Office to enchant, distract, and diffuse the more onerous odours lingering in the court. Not every foreign envoy found this tactic agreeable. Some complained quietly, of course, that the perfume was too potent, giving them headaches as they struggled to focus on matters of state. Others resorted to bringing small, mobile chairs draped in fresh linen sachets, stuffed with lavender and rosemary, to create a scented buffer between themselves and the Queen's, albeit well-intentioned olfactory assault. Yet, courtesy forbade outright refusal. No ambassador dared to wrinkle his nose in public. "One's nose never lies," Elizabeth I was rumoured to say, and every visitor quietly absorbed the message. The Queen spoke not only with words, but with the very air she breathed. Meanwhile, Elizabeth I's inner circle, Robert Dudley, her closest ladies-in-waiting, and a handful of top-tier nobles enjoyed privileged escapes to a private herb garden. There, amid aromatic beds of lavender, basil, and mint, they strolled at leisure, far from the musty seats and enclosed halls of the palace. The gentle, natural fragrances of the garden served as a balm to their senses, a welcome counterpoint to the artificial pomp indoors. It was here, on weathered stone benches under vine-draped pergolas, that the Queen dispensed personal counsel, adjudicated disputes among confidants, and shared whispered confidences, all accompanied by the soothing rustle of leaves and the heady scent of living blooms. When the court held its famed outdoor dances, the strategy extended into the dew-soaked gardens under moonlight. Violin strains drifted through the night air, weaving with the soft susurrus of leaves. Droplets of mist clung to petals and blades of grass, bearing a sweet, watery perfume that mingled with the smoky glow of candle lanterns hung from tree branches. This Tudor mystique was immersive, transporting guests into an enchanted realm. Yet, the rural scent of damp earth and the ever-present aroma of horse manure from the stables nearby often intruded upon the illusion. In response, palace attendants hastily scattered sprigs of rosemary and rose petals along the garden paths, hoping to mask the more pastoral notes. Within these candlelit ballets, courtiers whirled in layered gowns, their brocades catching the lantern's flicker. The interplay of natural and artificial scents created an intoxicating atmosphere that was at once dreamy and disconcerting. Some dancers paused to inhale the night-blooming jasmine, while simultaneously attempting to ignore the faint underlying odour of manure. They circled around the Queen's preferred vantage point, a small clearing ringed by potted citrus trees, where the air carried a delicate perfume of orange blossom, another royal favourite. Back inside the palace, the memory of the garden's leafy perfume persisted on guests' garments. Faint traces of mint and lavender clung to velvet cloaks, reminding visitors that they had passed through both the fragrant grandeur of nature and the more pungent reality of court life. It was an intricate choreography. Courtiers timed their exits to enjoy a final breath of fresh garden air before re-entering the heavy-scented chambers. Even the Queen's pages came equipped with little cloth wads soaked in citrus water, pressing them discreetly to their temples to stave off the onslaught of combined human and hearth smells. Yet, despite every precaution, the truth remained. The Tudor court was an olfactory battlefield. Elizabeth I's strategic use of scent, her perfumed handkerchief, her dais-based perfume broadcasts, her scented gardens represented a masterclass in intimidation by aroma. She held sway over minds and senses alike, demonstrating that authority could be wielded not only by edict and oration, but by the very air she commanded. And so, dear viewers, imagine yourself at one of these receptions. The hushed reverence as you approach her dais, the intoxicating swirl of bergamot and jasmine, the polite suppression of a sneeze as you discreetly lift your pomander. Feel the thrill of diplomatic theatre, where every inhale is a negotiation and every scented exhale a subtle assertion of power. In the world of Elizabeth I, scent was sovereign, and in the Tudor court, you were never merely a guest. You were always a participant in a grand, aromatic game of influence and intrigue, played out in the faintest of whiffs. The royal physicians of Elizabeth I carried a curious double title at court: healers of her body and connoisseurs of its aromas. Tasked with tending to her health, they brewed salves and poultices from dried herbs to dress wounds and reduce inflammation. Yet these same concoctions often amplified her personal scent into something unforgettable. Consider the pomade they applied to her scalp, a thick balm of goose fat and Beirut frankincense. While it helped to ward off the relentless lice that loved her unwashed hair, the result was a powerful, almost medicinal odor, the sharp bite of resin clashing with animal grease, wafting through palace corridors long after the balm had been massaged in. In whispered corridors, folk spoke of one particularly memorable gift from her rumoured favourite, Robert Dudley, a scent therapy pillow crafted from the finest linen. He had it sprinkled with a custom blend of chamomile blossoms, licorice root shavings, and Madagascar vanilla beans. The theory was that when warmed by body heat, the pillow would exhale a gentle lullaby of sweet chamomile and honeyed licorice, softened by the creamy warmth of vanilla. In practice, however, the vanilla proved overpowering, its heavy aroma turning some of her closest attendants green around the gills. "He surely means well," one lady-in-waiting confided, "but I fear he's trying a bit too hard to score points." The Queen, ever gracious, simply propped the pillow against her chamber door and allowed its heady scent to greet her every morning. Yet it was not only her scalp that demanded the physician's attention. Elizabeth I's notorious toothaches required daily treatment, and the remedy of choice involved volcanic ash pumice mixed with cloying honey. This gritty paste would be pressed against the inflamed gums to draw out pain and reduce swelling, a relief so immediate her eyes would flutter with pleasure, but the aftermath was aromatic. The combination of damp ash and fermenting honey created an undercurrent of mustiness, bolstered by the sweet tang of trapped sugars. Courtiers wavered in their courtesy as they leaned in for a royal audience, catching the scent of a medieval dentist's work. To counteract the effect, her advisors suggested an orange flower water, rinse a delicate infusion of citrus blossom essence distilled in copper stills. The idea was elegant, a cool, refreshing sip to chase away both pain and unpleasant odor. Instead, the strong citrusy tang stung her throat and left a harsh burn on her tongue. Worse, it mingled with the lingering honeyed ash to produce a bizarre, almost fermented orange aroma that only intensified the whole affair. The Queen, ever determined, tried swishing the rinse for days but soon abandoned the practice, deeming it unfit for polite company. Over time, Tudor physiologists began to notice the psychological toll of these battles with aroma. Elizabeth I, they observed, suffered from stress-induced nasal congestion, her sinuses clogged by the very fragrances meant to soothe her. Headaches throbbed behind her powdered brow, the result of too many rich spices swirling in tight chambers. On some mornings, she awoke to waves of nausea, repulsed by the scent of stale candle grease that still clung to her heavy curtains. Then came the incident that infamously forced her hand, a banquet cancelled at the last minute due to let us say a stench-induced blackout. In a rare public admission of the consequences of poor hygiene, the court conveyed that Her Majesty, regretting to postpone the feast, had been overcome by a sudden wave of noxious air rising from the lower halls. Whether the source was a mismanaged cesspit, a forgotten batch of poultry left to ruin, or simply the accumulated odours of months unwashed, no one could say. What mattered was that, for the first and only time in her 44-year reign, Elizabeth I publicly acknowledged that even a queen could be undone by foul air. In the aftermath, the royal physicians redoubled their efforts, experimenting with everything from alchemical vinegar sprays to bundles of aromatic grasses hung from ceiling beams. They installed makeshift screens of tanned leather soaked in rosemary extract, hoping to filter the worst of the miasma before it reached the throne room. Yet, for every measure taken, the palace seemed to find new pockets of scent rebellion. A forgotten chamber where mould thrived, a hidden crawl space where murine residents had set up camp, or the simple fact that the Queen herself refused to bathe more than once a fortnight. Through it all, Elizabeth I maintained her poise, her velvet robes swishing around her like scented armor. She understood, better than most, that the sense of smell could be both weapon and shield. A well-timed dab of ambergris a few paces forward could render even a hostile envoy disarmed by florals. A whisper of spice at the right moment could mask the odor of her more human vulnerabilities. But she also knew that scent was unforgiving. It betrayed the unsanitary corners of her realm, the parts of her court too busy with politics to fuss over soap and water. So she let the royal bathtub stand empty, its wooden sides rice from use, while her inner garments, those layers of linen that came closest to touching her skin, were boiled by footmen in copper cauldrons, scented with lavender. She changed them daily, an act of ritual purity that comforted her spirit if not her body, and she entrusted the rest to alchemy, to the specialists who promised that one day a perfect potion would conquer odor once and for all. In the latter half of the 16th century, a peculiar rumour began to ripple through the streets and taverns of England, the so-called stench epidemic, inherited among the nobility. Word had it that the aristocracy wore their attire until it was thoroughly filthy, then relied on an unending procession of perfume layers to mask the odour. By the dawn of the 17th century, writers were chronicling what they called the dirty ozone, swirling over Tudor London. One pamphleteer described the aroma as an iceberg melting in honey, all sweet and heavy, yet somehow repulsive to the last drop. When Spain launched the mighty Armada in 1588, arguably the greatest political drama of Elizabeth I's reign, the spectacle ashore seemed almost romantic from a distance. Warships ablaze on the salty waves, the gleaming sea horizon flecked with burning timbers, a scene for artists and poets. But back in Whitehall, the court's preparations for the Victory Feast became a foul comedy in scent. Trumpets blared and banners snapped in the breeze, yet every nobleman and woman discreetly pressed kerchiefs to their nostrils or drifted down the hallways, desperate to escape the searing tar odour from the broken Spanish ships brought back ashore. Worse still, the great chamber reeked of the court's own unwashed fabrics, the same sumptuous brocades now redolent of cooking grease and months of handling. And then, as smoke from the bonfires mingled with the tang of victory, a new form of aromatic warfare emerged, the clash of Eastern and Western scent traditions. While Admiral Nelson's later triumph would be famed for its invigorating sea salt and spruce aroma, in Elizabeth's day, the victorious court relied on a very different arsenal. The Spanish, for their part, favoured smoky labdanum and piquant black pepper, scents reminiscent of their sun-baked lands and battles in distant seas. But the English court, ever stalwart in its preferences, clung to familiar notes of vanilla, amber, and musk, sweet, heavy, and sensual. They layered pomander upon pomander, each stuffed with dried lavender, rosemary, and valerian root, cutting deep cotton undergarments into pockets to hold the herbal payload. In quieter moments, courtiers would gather behind the high embroidered screens to compare their olfactory defences. One would fan a silk sleeve dipped in ambergris tincture. Another would lift a perfumed hanky that dripped with violet and civet. They spoke in hushed tones of perfume warfare, joking that a well-timed spritz could fell an unwelcome diplomat faster than any royal decree. The Queen's own scent masters her royal perfumers watched these skirmishes with intrigue, tweaking formulas to ensure that no foreign emissary left without a lingering whiff of Tudor supremacy. Yet the real test came when survivors of the Armada stood before Elizabeth I at the victory celebration. Their uniforms still carried the brine and gunpowder smoke of naval combat, a gritty reminder of the ocean's cruelty. As they bowed before her dais, she allowed a trumpet of her vanilla amber musk to rise from her gloved hand, enveloping them in a thick, warm haze that smothered even the sharpest odour of sea spray. Some Spaniards, eyes watering, sneezed in surprise, then straightened their backs, understanding the subtle message. In this kingdom, scented might was as powerful as any warship. Amid all this aromatic armament, it is easy to forget that these stalwart scents were also a desperate avoidance of the grim evidence of poor hygiene. The great cedar chests in which gowns and cloaks were stored could banish only so much odour. Beneath each layer of resin and rosewater, the lingering notes of sweat, unwashed hair, and the ever-present mustiness of damp stone continued to hum. Even the Queen Elizabeth I was not immune. She managed her smell as expertly as she managed her finances, but no blend of civet and frankincense could truly erase the reality of months without a proper tub. And so, dear viewer, imagine yourself at that Armada victory feast. The floorboards groaned under hundreds of velvet-clad feet. Horns and timpanis boomed proclamations of triumph. Laughter and chatter echoed off tapestry-lined walls. Yet, every inhale brought a dizzying cocktail. The zesty spike of spilled ale, the faint tang of salt-soaked hair, the comforting sweetness of vanilla, and the stubborn undercurrent of rotting timber from the sea. It was a sensory extravaganza, one that left attendees both exhilarated and queasy. By the end of the night, many courtiers slunk away, eyes red and noses pinched, eager for the cool night air beyond the palace gates. Some paused in the gardens to breathe in the jasmine and night-blooming stocks, finding momentary relief in nature's softer perfumes. Others hurried home to soak linen shirts in vinegar baths, desperate to rinse away the memory of that evening's rancid feast. In their chambers they stored away their gilded gowns, dripping with subtle secrets, until the next grand occasion demanded their presence and their carefully curated aromas. Thus concluded another chapter in the olfactory saga of Elizabeth I's court. A tale of victory, of power, and of the indomitable human urge to mask the unmaskable. In Tudor England, where kings ruled by sword and scent, a well-timed perfume could topple an alliance or cement a peace. And while the Armada's fires raged on the high seas, within the palace walls a different conflict raged, one of musk versus mould, of civet versus sea salt, and of perfumed resolve against the relentless truths of the human body. In that fragrant theatre, Elizabeth I reigned supreme, wielding her amber and vanilla as deftly as any admiral wielded his sails. As our journey through the Tudor scent night draws to its close, we find ourselves looking back at a court that is very different from the one immortalized in stately portraiture. Elizabeth I, beneath her layers of rouge, powdered wig, and sumptuous gowns, was both the architect and the maestro of her kingdom's grand olfactory festival. She wielded power not only through her proclamations and strategic mind, but also through her uncanny ability to manipulate the very air her subjects breathed, creating an impression of authority, mystique, and, at times, outright obsession. In effect, she enacted a rule of less contact, more cologne. Intimacy was limited, touch was restrained, and every approach was buffered by pomanders, pomades, and pomander fumes. Her courtiers learned quickly that to win favour, they must douse themselves in layers of musk and amber. To offend her, one need only arrive unperfumed. The strict control of her image went hand in hand with a laissez-faire attitude to personal cleanliness. It was a court where the maxim, "see but don't smell," reigned supreme, and scent became a prime instrument of statecraft. Make no mistake, Tudor fragrance was more than mere cosmetics. It was Cold War weaponry in a pre-modern era. Whoever mastered scent held sway over the crowd's psychology. A waft of rose might soothe a tense debate. A swirl of civet could unnerve a would-be challenger. Elizabeth I understood this subtle power better than any statesman of her day. She turned perfume into performance, layering notes like military regiments on parade, each regiment charged with its own sensory mission. Yet, like all empires, this one faded. Today we glimpse Tudor aroma only through the faintest of traces. Scraps of embroidered velvet rescued from dusty attics, the pages of early medical treatises that describe pomander recipes, the petulant remarks in ambassadors' letters about the sweet and sour haze. Urban archaeologists study soil samples from Whitehall's foundations, seeking chemical fingerprints of centuries-old miasmas. Textile conservators gently unroll century-old fabrics, breathing in echoes of lavender and tallow, trying to imagine the heady bouquets once anchored by lead-white makeup and goose-fat pomades. But the true Tudor scent is gone, scattered like ashes in the wind of time. All that remains are legends. Of a queen who could unsettle a foreign envoy with a well-timed spritz of orange blossom water. Of a court that danced masked not just by velvet, but by the swirl of aromatic smoke. Of a palace that held more secrets in its scented drapes than in its fortified walls. We remember her as the pale, powdered sovereign, the virgin queen, whose beauty regimen was as laborious as any war campaign, whose greatest victories were fought in the fragrant theatre of perception. As we finally bid goodnight to the Tudor court's great scent spectacle, Perhaps we too can appreciate the strange intimacy of smell, its power to transport us, to unite us in a fleeting moment of shared sense. And perhaps in the soft hush of candlelight where we sit now, we can imagine Elizabeth I, hand raised with her perfumed kerchief, commanding not just allegiance, but the very air itself. The legend of her scented reign lives on, not only in our history books, but in the very idea that power can be whispered not just in words, but in the softest swirl of fragrance. After the grand feast, life behind the scenes at court was a series of symbolic cleansings that were more ritual than reality. Once Elizabeth I and her nobles slipped into the royal antechamber, they were led down to the changing suite, a room filled floor to ceiling with bundles of dried herbs, ornate censers, and pomanders hanging from hooks. The air there was thick with the sweet tang of lavender, mint, and bay leaves, all intended to blanket the lingering odours of banquet grease and sweat. The chief attendants, generally the longest-serving valets and ladies-in-waiting, began by taking a large ostrich feather brush, or a broad feather broom. With gentle swishes, they'd dust off each garment's exterior, lifting away visible crumbs and the worst of the surface dust. Then, beneath the languid flicker of candlelight, they held up each robe or gown to the breeze generated by an ivory-handled fan. This fanning helped any trapped odours escape upward, at least in theory, and allowed a light mist of scented oil to settle into the fabric, courtesy of small glass vials tucked into their pockets. Next came the makeshift drying rack, a simple wooden frame with enough pegs to hang several layers of outer attire. Candles were arranged beneath polished copper trays, the gentle heat warming the garments without wilting the embroidery. As the oils warmed and faint smoke wafted up, it created a rudimentary drying chamber, though in practice, it felt more like a smoky tent. Despite these efforts, any sleeve dampened even slightly by perspiration quickly reawakened the musty tang of long-stored cloth. Meanwhile, Elizabeth I's bathing routine took place in a tiny, mobile wooden tub mounted on a wheeled stand. The tub was laboriously filled with water heated over a brazier in a large copper cauldron. Into the steaming bath went handfuls of fresh basil or crushed mint leaves, herbal additives meant to cleanse both body and spirit. Yet because she believed, like many of her day, that water would open the pores and admit disease, the Queen's actual immersion was swift. A valet would steady her as she stepped onto a low stool, then hold a folding fan to stir the steam away from her face, preventing a stifling cloud from overwhelming her senses. With one graceful dip, Elizabeth would lower her hands and perhaps her feet into the lukewarm brew, marvelling at the satiny feel of scented water, but never daring to submerge more. After mere moments, she'd rise, lightly pat down her arms and neck with a linen cloth wrung from the same herbal infusion, and be guided back to her chair. The entire affair, from setting the fire to finishing the rinse, took hours of preparation by a dozen servants, yet lasted scarcely more than a couple of minutes in her presence. Emerging from this miniature bathing ritual, the Queen was ready for the most elaborate part of her preparation, her makeup and hair. The first order of business was a thick application of lead-based white foundation, multiple coats, each allowed to set before the next swipe. This mask not only concealed her smallpox scars and the first signs of aging, but also served as a barrier to that ever-present slaughter of odours. Next, a layer of crushed pearl powder was dusted over her face, lending a subtle shimmer beneath the candlelight. Her lips were painted in a vibrant red, made from powdered cinnabar mixed with animal fat, the colour chosen to evoke both vitality and authority. Eyes received a hint of clove oil for sheen, and cheeks were marked with a small dab of vermilion to suggest warmth beneath the pale mask. All the while, her ladies-in-waiting worked in near silence, each motion practiced and precise, as if performing a sacred rite under the hush of embroidered curtains. Meanwhile, her wig, an elaborate construction of human and animal hair, was prepared on a nearby stand. First, the hairdresser would steam it lightly over an open flame, coaxing the curls into shape. Then came the perfuming, a fine dusting of lavender powder, followed by a spritz of rosewater, and finally a few drops of civet tincture rubbed gently into the cap. Any stray gap at the hairline or any tiny tear in the linen cap was expertly concealed with a dab of thick cream infused with chamomile. The result was a towering coiffure that sat firmly atop her head, impervious to curious gales or accidental brushes. Once the layers of wig and makeup were complete, the Queen's final ensemble was assembled. First, the new linen shift, changed daily and steeped in vinegar to fend off mould. Over it, layers of petticoat and farthingale cinched her waist to the desired silhouette. Then came the gown itself, an opulent construction of brocade, trimmed with pearls and gold lace. Each layer was dusted with potpourri herbs and scented oils before being carefully drawn over her shoulders. A final swirl of perfumed gloves, and Elizabeth I was reborn, the eternal queen, immaculate and unsullied upon her throne. All told, this post-feast cleansing and dressing ritual could stretch over 4 to 5 hours, requiring the services of dozens of attendants, valets, maids, perfumers, hairdressers, each responsible for a minute but critical detail. Their combined efforts ensured that the Queen's appearance remained unchanged by time or odour. Through this painstaking process, Elizabeth maintained the illusion of an unassailable, eternal majesty, even as the circle of perfume and wash clung to the shadow of the true world of scents she so carefully choreographed. Outside the palace walls, the true race of scent begins among the nobility. Aristocratic families hired private nose specialists, whose sole mission was to bewilder onlookers' olfactory senses. These masters of aroma concocted sachets filled with rare herbs, painted nails with a paste of clay and honey, and tinted lips using powdered violet petals. While the average courtier clung to safe notes of vanilla and ambergris, a handful of adventurous earls pushed boundaries, experimenting with brimstone and plantain seed oil to craft proprietary fragrances. The results were often catastrophic foul odors that outmatched nature itself, but at least they left a truly unforgettable impression. This rivalry reached a fever pitch during the famed summer balls at Hampton Court. Guests, eager to outshine each other, donned lighter fabrics, sleek silks and gauzy linens, but redoubled their efforts in scent. They slipped into closed-toe slippers, soaked in lemongrass oil, each step releasing a citrusy tingle. As lanterns were lit and musicians tuned their violins, couples took to the dance floor. By dusk, the mingled fumes of human perspiration, rendered animal grease, and drifting candle smoke coalesced into a thick mist of fragrance that hung in every corner of the hall. For those arriving late, entering the hall became an ordeal of breath control. They whispered tales of nobles who, desperate to avoid the suffocating haze, stood at the doorway and sucked air through bamboo tubes stuffed with crushed mint and rosemary, effectively filtering the most noxious layers before stepping inside. These improvised herbal straws were the evening's unsung heroes, granting newcomers a momentary reprieve from the dense bouquet within. Behind the veneer of elegance, this scented competition was more than mere vanity. It was a display of wealth and influence. Only the richest families could afford the frequent restocking of exotic pomanders or the services of dedicated perfumers. Hearing of an especially potent personal fragrance was akin to learning of a new secret alliance. To wear an exclusive scent was to signal political favor or familial prestige. As the music swelled and dancers glided across the polished floorboards, each twirl released hidden fragrances stored in layered hems and tucked-away pouches. By the second waltz, the air grew so heavy that conversation turned to head nods and elbow jabs. No one dared lean in to speak. Mouths remained politely closed as courtiers angled their heads, a subtle dance of social navigation to avoid the thick, olfactive soup. Outside, the night air felt miraculous. A few brave souls escaped the court grounds, stepping into the dewy garden to inhale the crisp scent of night-blooming jasmine and wet grass. Often they leaned against stone balustrades, letting the gentle breeze carry away the memory of candle smoke and oily residue. For a fleeting moment, the world felt simple again, just earth and blossom, a stark contrast to the densely layered perfumes and body oils of the dancing hall. Back inside, the competition did not let up. Some gentlemen produced small flasks of concentrated rose extract, sprinkling a single drop on their cravats before each dance. Ladies pressed tiny pomanders to their throats in between measures, hoping the burst of lavender, cinnamon, or civet would outlast a partner's close embrace. The goal was audacious: to become the living embodiment of an exotic garden, even as the reality was a bustling ballroom steeped in a complex stew of sweat, soot, and resinous notes. And yet, this riot of fragrance carried its own costs. Courtiers returned home with throats raw from the mingled scents, noses red from incessant sniffing, and minds woozy from the relentless olfactory assault. Some developed chronic headaches, leading to whispered rumors of secret tinctures they kept on hand. Drops of wormwood oil or tiny sachets of chamomile to nibble on between dances. Others found themselves unable to differentiate one aroma from the next, the ceaseless barrage leaving their senses dull and confused. But in the whirlwind of scented rivalry, one truth remained. At Hampton Court, the true competition was not who could dance best, but who could leave the most indelible fragrance trail. Each perfume duel was a subtle contest of wills, a masked declaration of status and daring. To emerge from the ballroom with your chosen scent still clinging to your sleeve was a triumph rivaling any ribbon or accolade. As dawn approached, and the final minuet echoed through grand arches, weary dancers stumbled out into the sunrise, lids heavy and breath uneven. They carried with them the remnants of a night spent navigating a labyrinth of aroma, some fragrant, others formidable. And though they would soon bathe in fresh water and change into newly laundered shifts, the memory of that dense, heady atmosphere would linger on their garments and in their fading recollections. Thus concluded yet another chapter in the great Tudor odour race, a spectacle of silk and sweat, of bottled blooms and burnt resin, all woven together in a courtly tapestry of smell. In that capricious world of perfumed prowess, the scent one wore spoke louder than words, an unspoken language of power played out on a dance floor thick with memory and musk. As the season of royal progresses dawned, Elizabeth I and her court departed the smothering haze of London, escaping not only the lingering epidemic rumours of fetid odours, but also the real spectre of plague. Their journey carried them through rolling countryside, where fields lay golden under the sun, and the air tasted of dry hay, wildflowers, and sun-warmed earth. In these fresh expanses, the Queen conceived a novel idea, an odour map. With meticulous notes, she recorded which cottages boasted a clear, sweet well, which meadows exhaled the gentle perfume of hay and wild sage, which kitchens perpetually simmered pots of fragrant herbs. Thus she wove a network of scent sanctuaries to steer her retinue clear of both foul stenches and hidden disease. At each grand manor they visited, local nobles vied to demonstrate their hospitality and their olfactory prowess. Straw was strewn fresh at the doorway, its crisp, grassy scent welcoming weary travellers. Eucalyptus bark incense was burned in braziers to cleanse the air, while briquettes of sandalwood charcoal smouldered in hearths to seep a warm, resinous note through the halls. In elaborate flower beds by the entry, chamomile blossoms swayed in the breeze, their apple-like fragrance drifting on the wind. These efforts served a dual purpose: to honour the Queen's presence, and to rid the rooms of any residual miasma carried from city life. Elizabeth I delighted in these country receptions. One evening, beneath a heavenly ceiling of stars, she hosted an open-air feast in a rose garden redolent with blooms. Tables were laid with baskets of summer fruits and platters of fresh smoked trout. Lanterns hung from branches, their soft glow dancing on petals and leaves. As courtiers reclined on carved benches, the mingling aromas of wild roses, crushed straw, and distant barn hay conjured a pastoral symphony, a fragrant respite from the harsh tang of powdered lead and musk back at Whitehall. Between courses, the Queen strolled along pebble paths bordered by lavender bushes. She inhaled deeply, murmuring to her ladies in waiting that such pure air made her forget the rigid court rituals and the ever-present cloud of pomades and civet. For a moment, she was simply a woman among flowers, free from the glare of candles and the weight of her white-painted mask. But Elizabeth's progress was not merely an indulgent pretext. It was also a matter of public health and surveillance. With her odour map clutched in hand, she and her closest advisers paused at each waypoint to sketch notes in a leather-bound journal. 12 o'clock. Well water clear, taste of limestone, she scribbled one morning beside a thatched inn. 3 o'clock. Field of wild thyme, breeze scented like honey. Their entourage included apothecaries who would gather samples of local herbs, testing potions right there under the open sky. Any sign of sour or acrid, they warned, might signal stagnant water or concealed waste, and the party moved swiftly on. At dusk, when the air cooled and barn owls began their silent patrols, Elizabeth hosted impromptu dances in the village square. Torches were lit in wooden sconces, casting flickering shadows across half-timbered houses. Couples took to a makeshift floor of smooth flagstones, their laughter echoing against the night breeze scented with straw and smoke. Footmen hurried to replenish the herb braziers, while musicians struck up rustic tunes on lutes and violins. In these moments, the queen revelled in the earthy odours of home, an aroma far more comforting than the layered perfumes of her palace chambers. Yet, ever the strategist, Elizabeth never lost sight of her broader aims. Her progresses served to extend royal presence into the realm, reminding subjects of her sovereignty while ensuring that both she and her court remained as healthy as possible. The odour map became a living document, guiding future excursions and aiding in planning military musters or diplomatic visits. Even after the retinue returned to London, notes about country scents influenced new pomander recipes, stamped with "From the Queen's Gardens for a quick sensory escape at court." In time, the progress season yielded a cherished memory, a tapestry of rural fragrances woven into the Queen's reign. When chroniclers later penned accounts of Elizabeth I, they noted not just her statecraft and triumphs, but also these fragrant pilgrimages that brought relief and renewal. Though centuries have passed, we still glimpse her odour map in archives and smell the echoes of those summer roses in field guides and restoration gardens. Perhaps most enduring is the lesson that Elizabeth I gleaned from her travels. That scent can be both sanctuary and sentinel. By mapping odours and harnessing country airs, she safeguarded her people's health while crafting experiences of sensory delight. And so, as we close our eyes and imagine walking beside her on a sunlit country lane, we too can breathe in the mingled scents of hay, rose, and mint, and remember the queen who mastered not only palaces but the very air her kingdom breathed. Back at court, Elizabeth I often retreated to her private herb chamber, a sanctuary of glass jars and earthenware pots lined along oak shelves. Here, she personally selected each ingredient for her daily teas: musk for clarity, amber for warmth, rose petals for calm, and mint for freshness. Each herb had its own measured dose, some to soothe a pounding head, others to quell a cough, and many chosen simply to mask the lingering court odours that even her royally scented gowns could not fully conquer. The Queen's tea ritual was both ceremony and strategy. A silver spoon measured powdered ambergris into a porcelain cup, followed by crushed petals of the damask rose. Fresh mint leaves, plucked at dawn, were bruised between her fingers before being dropped into the steaming water. Elizabeth I believed that the precise balance of these aromas could harmonise the body's humours and sharpen her mind for councils and audiences alike. Beyond tea, her ministers crafted what came to be known as the royal hand wash. In cool underground stone vessels, they mixed sharp apple cider vinegar with sweet licorice root, sprigs of lavender, and local honey. This elixir was allowed to ferment in the dark cellars behind Whitehall, where the air remained crisp. Before every audience with foreign ambassadors, Elizabeth would ceremonially wash her hands in this mixture, as if purifying both flesh and will. Court observers noted that the hand wash served more than hygiene. It was an olfactory curtain. Each visitor caught the brisk scent of vinegar, tempered by honeyed licorice and floral lavender, as they approached her dais. The aroma announced her presence, and subtly reminded them they stood in the realm of her refined sensibilities. A notable envoy once trembled at the tang, later describing it as the true marker of royal protocol. Chroniclers of the day recorded Elizabeth I's deep faith in what they termed the miracle of aromatics. She believed every scent carried its own key, some beneficial, others harmful. On a damp winter's morning, she famously ordered the painted chamber's grand doors repainted with a lime wash blended with dried orange peel. This mixture was said to dispel the damp mold chi that threatened the court's well-being. In those same records, it is noted that at the entrance to the Parliament meeting room, Elizabeth placed a large bowl of rose-infused vinegar. Delegates, upon crossing the threshold, were instructed to inhale through this olfactory guard. The intent was twofold: to ward off the musty air creeping in through ancient stone walls, and to signal that any impure intention, like any foul odour, would not be permitted within her halls of governance. Her passion for scented strategies extended to every corner of the palace. Tapestries were routinely beaten outside and then lightly misted with solution distilled from cedar and sweetgrass. Curtains were dipped in mild, aromatic baths of chamomile and rue. Even the royal dogs were brushed with infused oil, anointing them as living markers of her sophisticated realm. Despite these efforts, the court's base odours occasionally prevailed. In wet weather, the stone floors of the great hall exhaled a dank chill, and the smell of dripping eaves mingled with burning thatch from nearby stables. To combat this, Elizabeth sometimes dispatched pages bearing small brass censers filled with copal and benzoin. The smoke intended to settle dust and lighten the air before council meetings. Her contemporaries were both amused and in awe of her aromatic governance. One visiting ambassador wrote of being greeted by a procession of perfumed ladies carrying trays of scented vials, each meant to accompany his cloak as he toured the palace. Though diplomatic in taste, the ambassador could not conceal his delight at the novelty of Elizabeth's scented order of ceremony. In her private moments, Elizabeth I found solace in the herb chamber's quiet hum. She would lean over the work table, inhaling the heady swirl of colours and fragrances, reflecting on state matters as each petal and seed whispered its own wisdom. For her, scent was as vital a tool as quill, and parchment a means to shape perception, to protect her health, and to assert her singular authority over a court forever dancing between ceremony and sensation. Thus, the Queen's aromatic experiments left an indelible mark on English court life. Even as centuries passed, occasional draughts of rose vinegar were found in forgotten containers, and traces of orange peel limewash lingered in palace walls. Elizabeth's legend endures not only in her portraits and proclamations, but in the very idea that a sovereign could rule through the subtlest of senses, crafting a legacy built upon the invisible yet undeniable power of scent. And so, dear late-night explorers, as we wrap our lantern-lit tour of Elizabeth I's scented empire, what wisdom do we carry back into our modern lives? Tonight's video has taken us through the grand halls and hidden chambers of Tudor court, showing how the Queen wielded fragrance as both armour and weapon, crafting an identity that transcended paint and poetry. But beyond the dizzying pomanders and elaborate perfume strategies, there's a core message that resonates even today: the power of perception and how the senses shape our interactions with the world. First, we've seen how Elizabeth I controlled her environment through scent, deliberately curating aromas to project authority, calm anxiety, and even to suppress less flattering truths. In our own lives, we too surround ourselves with sensory cues, from the perfume we choose in the morning to the playlists we play at our desks. The lesson here is mindfulness. By paying attention to the small details how a scent makes us feel, the atmosphere we create in our homes or offices, we gain subtle agency over our moods, and, by extension, our relationships and productivity. Second, the video illustrates the inseparable link between health and hygiene. Despite her wealth, Elizabeth I's bathing rituals were fraught with fear and misconception. Today, we benefit from centuries of scientific progress, but often overlook simple self-care rituals. Washing our hands correctly, taking time for real cleansing, physical, mental, and emotional. Incorporating intentional moments of refreshment, whether a brisk morning shower, a few deep inhales of essential oils, or a dedicated spa night can rejuvenate body and mind, helping us face daily challenges with renewed clarity. Third, Elizabeth's odor map reminds us of the value of planning and environment scouting. Long before public health maps existed, the Queen charted wells and wildflower fields to safeguard her court from disease and stink. In the modern context, this translates into thoughtful preparation, researching travel destinations for safety and comfort, choosing workspaces that inspire creativity, or simply mapping out quiet parks and cafes where we can recharge. By identifying our own scent sanctuaries, places that restore and center us, we build resilience against stress and burnout. Moreover, the fierce competition among Tudor nobles over signature scents offers a cautionary tale about excess and authenticity. Some courtiers went so far as to drizzle brimstone on their gloves, resulting in unforgettable, if not entirely pleasant, olfactory assaults. Today's parallel might be our overuse of gimmicks, garish marketing, overly bombastic presentations, or the pursuit of attention at any cost. True influence, as Elizabeth I demonstrated, comes from a balanced blend: authenticity, consistency, and respect for others' comfort. In our professions and personal brands, less can often be more. A genuine smile, a well-timed compliment, or a modest but meaningful gesture can leave a far better impression than any over-the-top stunt. Finally, the Queen's experiments remind us that innovation is timeless. From experimenting with pomades to pioneering scented diplomacy, Elizabeth I never feared trial and error. In our own lives, whether we're entrepreneurs, artists, or community leaders, embracing a spirit of curiosity and willingness to iterate can lead to breakthroughs. We may not concoct herbal elixirs, but we can test new habits, adopt emerging tools, or reimagine traditions, all in the service of growth. So, as you drift off tonight, consider these takeaways. Cultivate your own sensory environment with purpose. Honor the basics of self-care and hygiene. Map out your personal sanctuaries for health and creativity. Choose authenticity over extravagance in how you present yourself. And adopt a courageous mindset toward experimentation. If tonight's journey through scent and strategy has inspired you, give the video a like and subscribe to join our nightly wanderings through history's quirkiest corners. Drop a comment with your favorite modern self-care ritual or the fragrance that makes you feel most like yourself. Until next time, dim the lights, maybe light a candle, and let the gentle hum of history's lessons guide your dreams. Good night, and may your own personal brand be as unforgettable as a Tudor pomander without the stink.